On May 27, 1831, in what is now southern Kansas, a small assembly of merchants from New Mexico, the heart of what was then New Spain, gathered by the Samaritan River. These traders had been bartering with the Comanche, exchanging goods and services that both parties deemed indispensable. Yet, the atmosphere was heavy with an unspoken tension. The merchants, visibly worn and weathered, had just completed their dealings. However, trade on the southern plains was rarely straightforward. It carried an ever-present risk of erupting into violence, particularly when negotiating with the Comanche. These lands were governed by an intricate balance of commerce and conflict, where deals weren't sealed with simple handshakes. The Comanche were not only fierce warriors but also masterful negotiators, their influence spanning a vast territory that would eventually encompass Texas, Oklahoma, New Mexico, and beyond. This was a domain controlled by some of the most formidable people in North America. Over time, a handful of astute traders like this group had succeeded in forging strong and mutually beneficial relationships with the Comanche. These alliances often meant the difference between survival and demise. Many others who ventured into Comancheria with dreams of fortune were either swallowed by its dangers, vanishing without a trace, or returned, irreparably scarred by their encounters with the tribe's fury. Unlike typical newcomers seeking wealth, these traders were descendants of Spanish settlers who had intermarried with Native American communities. This heritage gave them an invaluable familiarity with Comanche customs and a deeper understanding of the land's complexities. Through this, they carved out a precarious yet lucrative role, mediating trade between the Spanish settlers of New Mexico and the Comanche. However, the history between the two groups was anything but harmonious. For over a century, the Comanche had wielded their might across the plains, their raids driven by both vengeance for past grievances and an unyielding quest for land and power. From the Texas Hill Country to the high plains of Colorado, their campaigns spread terror among neighboring tribes and settlers alike. Yet, beneath their fearsome reputation as relentless warriors, the Comanche were also shrewd merchants. Their expansive territories were home to bountiful buffalo herds, prized hides, and war horses of exceptional quality. Still, there were goods they could not produce themselves: metal tools for crafting arrowheads and spears, brilliantly hued dyes for artistic expression, and intricate textiles and pottery, which they lacked the means to create. These gaps in resources made trade an essential aspect of their survival and prosperity. For such coveted goods, the Comanche relied on traders like those gathered by the Samaritan River. These merchants brought copper, iron, textiles, cotton, and firearms, exchanging them for the wealth of buffalo hides, horses, and other resources the Comanche controlled with near absolute dominance. Over time, these traders had mastered the precarious art of dealing with the Comanche, establishing reliable trade routes and learning the unwritten rules of the plains: how to negotiate without offense, and most critically, how to stay alive. Yet the threat of violence was never far. The Comanche, known for their unpredictability, could turn on a trader in an instant if circumstances demanded. For now, however, these traders had completed their dealings and were preparing for the long journey home, weary yet eager to leave behind the shadow of potential danger. As they readied themselves to depart, something unexpected caught their attention on the horizon: a lone rider approaching from the distance. At first, they assumed it was another Comanche scout, but as the figure drew closer, it became clear he was different. This was no Comanche. This was an American, a man whose presence was as unexpected as it was extraordinary. Unbeknownst to the traders, this rider was none other than Jedediah Strong Smith, one of the most legendary figures of the American frontier. By 1831, Smith had achieved feats of exploration that few could fathom. His relentless journeys had taken him from his beginnings in upstate New York through the Great Lakes and St. Louis, across the Dakotas, the Rocky Mountains, the Mojave Desert, and much of the West Coast, including California, Oregon, and even Canada. Along the way, Smith had endured and survived unimaginable hardships: attacks by the Arikara, Mojave, and Umpqua tribes, and a vicious grizzly bear mauling that left him permanently scarred. He had ventured further and survived more of North America's perils than any man of his time, driven by an insatiable thirst for adventure and discovery. Smith's exploits had also brought him into the company of the era's most renowned mountain men, including William Ashley, Jim Bridger, and Hugh Glass. Many of these men had met violent ends in their pursuit of fortune and glory in the untamed wilds of North America, but Smith had outlived them all. Despite the constant dangers and harrowing experiences, Smith remained deeply rooted in his faith and an unshakable belief in capitalism, striving to build a secure future for his family. After a particularly grueling expedition, he returned to St. Louis in 1829, vowing to retire from the mountains. He purchased a home, sent money to Ohio to support his father, and seemingly embraced a quieter life. Yet, like so many frontiersmen before him, Smith found the pull of the wilderness irresistible. By 1831, wanderlust had overtaken him once more. The prospect of leading an expedition to Santa Fe, a burgeoning hub of trade and opportunity, was a temptation he could not ignore. And so, Jedediah Smith, scarred yet undeterred, set out once again into the wild frontier, where fortune, danger, and destiny awaited. And so, Jedediah Smith joined forces with William Sublette and David Jackson, leading a wagon train laden with goods toward the bustling trade routes of the Southwest. The journey began uneventfully, the early days marked by smooth progress and hopeful spirits. Yet, as they traversed the arid plains, trouble soon loomed. The water sources they depended on began to dwindle, and by May 27th, they were completely without fresh water for both themselves and their livestock. Desperation mounting, Smith and his companion, a man named Fitzpatrick, set out to find a solution. Their search led them south toward the Samaritan River, hoping to discover a spring to save their party from disaster. When they reached the river, however, their hopes were dashed. The water was brackish, far too salty to drink. Determined to persevere, the two men split tasks. Fitzpatrick began digging into a shallow depression in the earth where water might pool, while Smith pressed further south in search of a more reliable source. It was during this search that Smith encountered the Comancheros, Spanish traders with long-standing ties to the Comanche. The Comancheros, however, were far from welcoming. They viewed Smith's presence with suspicion, well aware that the Comanche were nearby. Relations between the two groups were already precarious, and the Comancheros had no intention of risking Comanche wrath by fraternizing with an outsider. They warned Smith to leave immediately, telling him the Comanche were close. But Smith, driven by the dire need of his companions, could not turn back. After some urging, the Comancheros reluctantly pointed him toward a spring a few miles away and sent him on his way. Unbeknownst to Smith, his movements were already being closely monitored. A group of 15 to 20 Comanche warriors had likely spotted him long before his encounter with the Comancheros. They watched silently, their presence an ominous shadow over his every step. To the Comanche, Smith was more than a trespasser. He represented the encroaching threat of U.S. expansion into their lands. Fiercely protective of their territory, the Comanche were not inclined to tolerate intrusions of any kind. When Smith arrived at the spring, the warriors moved swiftly, surrounding him in a crescent-shaped formation. A seasoned frontiersman, Smith attempted to communicate using sign language and his rudimentary Spanish. But the warriors had no interest in diplomacy. The atmosphere grew increasingly tense as the Comanche began to taunt Smith's horse, attempting to unseat him. Despite his calm demeanor, Smith's attempts to bargain for his life, offering his possessions as payment, were met with cold indifference. The warriors had no intention of negotiating. Without warning, a single rifle shot shattered the silence. The bullet tore into Smith's shoulder, sending him lurching in the saddle and his horse into a frenzied panic. Despite the excruciating pain, Smith's instincts took over. He managed to return fire, fatally wounding one of the warriors. But his resistance was fleeting. The remaining Comanche descended upon him with a fury. Dragged from his horse, Smith was quickly surrounded by lances and overwhelmed by sheer numbers. The attack was unrelenting and merciless. Smith fought valiantly, summoning every ounce of strength in a hopeless attempt to defend himself. But the outcome was inevitable. The warriors mocked him as they delivered blow after blow, their rage evident in the brutality of the assault. Within moments, Jedediah Smith lay dead, his body abandoned on the plains as the Comanche claimed his horse, weapons, and belongings. Satisfied with their vengeance, the warriors melted back into the vast expanse of the prairie. Smith's body was never recovered. Days later, the Comancheros encountered the Sublette Jackson party along the Santa Fe Trail, delivering the grim news of Smith's fate. His death marked the tragic end of a legendary frontiersman, a man whose courage and wanderlust had taken him to the farthest reaches of the American wilderness, but could not shield him from its perils. The Comancheros, having completed their dealings with the Comanche, eventually encountered Jedediah Smith's brother, Austin. Among their possessions were Smith's rifles and pistols, tangible evidence of his tragic end. Stricken with grief, Austin later penned a letter to their father in Ohio, delivering the devastating news. In the letter, Austin recounted the harrowing events that had unfolded. Your son Jedediah was killed on the 27th of May, on his journey to Santa Fe, at the hands of the Comanche Indians. His party was suffering greatly from a lack of water, and he had gone ahead, alone, in search of the river they so desperately needed. He found it, but the letter trailed off into sorrowful detail, painting a picture of courage met with tragedy. It was a loss that echoed across their family and beyond, a reminder of the unforgiving dangers of the frontier that even the most skilled and resilient could not always escape. Jedediah Smith's death marked the end of an extraordinary life, but his legacy as one of America's greatest explorers would endure long after the summer of 1831. Thank you for watching the video until the end. Don't forget to hit like, subscribe, and turn on notifications so you won't miss any new videos from us. What do you think about today's topic? Leave your thoughts in the comments below. And if you found the video helpful, feel free to share it with your friends and family. We hope you had a great time. See you in the next video with even more exciting content. Make sure to subscribe so you don't miss out.